VMDK. When I do that, you'll notice that I'm going through a reconfigure virtual machine task here to complete that hot extension of the VM's virtual disk. If I now go back to Edit Settings and I take a look at the hard disk again, you'll see that my provision size for that disk is now 45 gigabytes instead of 41. So this really significantly eases the process of adding additional space to the volume that's been exposed to that virtual machine. You know, depending on your operating system, you may have to go into that operating system and then extend the volume as well, that usual two-step process that's involved with doing that. But this first step, actually giving it more space, if you have the space, well, that's very simple for you to do. Now, when we created this virtual machine, we created this virtual machine as a thin provision virtual machine. And I think I mentioned earlier that thin provision virtual machines, they're great for storage space because they don't consume anything until they actually need to consume it. But thin provision disks sometimes have a little bit of a performance hit because of that thin provisioning process whenever I'm adding more data. I'm extending the volume size beyond what has been existingly provisioned for that VM. In these cases, I may want to convert my thin to thick, or conversely, I may want to convert my thick to thin. Now, how do I go about doing that? There are actually a couple of different ways to accomplish the task. One such way uses the command line tool vmkfstools. Doing so with vmkfstools with a powered off VM, you can run a single command from the console of the ESX host and actually have it go about converting the thick to thin or the thin to thick. Now that's all at the command line. I'm not really terribly interested in showing you all the command line pieces today because I think in practice you will probably be making more use of the user interface tools. So be aware, especially if you're planning on taking the exam, that the vmkfstools command is one that you would run from the local console or from SSH. However, inside of this interface, right here inside of the vCenter client, I want to actually figure out how I might convert this from a thin to perhaps a thick provision disk. One way that I can do so is by doing storage vmotion. Now that is the migration task here, one of the things that we wanted to talk about here in this nugget. If I right click on a VM and choose migrate, I have a number of different options that are available for me for where I want to change things. Okay, maybe I want to change the host, a classic vmotion, right? I want to move this virtual machine from one place to the other. Perhaps I want to change the data store. Okay, so I want to leave the virtual machine running on the same host, but I just want to move its body underneath to a different data store somewhere else. I can also do both at the same time if I want. However, doing both at the same time requires, as you can see here, the virtual machine to be powered off. I'm actually going to do these kind of backwards because I want to show you the changing of the data store first, or the svmotion, before I actually show you the vmotion. And I do this because if I change the data store here, you'll see one very important selection box here up here that says select a virtual disk format. So remember, what is a storage vmotion? What is an svmotion? The brains of the VM, the processing of that VM, does not leave the host where it is currently operating. However, the body, the disk of the VM, changes data stores from one location to another. Now, when I go about doing that process, I have the ability to change the virtual disk format. So here's my svmotion configuration screen here. Okay, and currently this virtual machine is sitting wherever it happens to be sitting. And perhaps I want to migrate it to the NFS mount so that I want to put it over on NFS. And I want to do so just simply so that I can actually move it from a thin provision disk to a thick provision lazy zeroed disk. All I need to do at this point is actually, like I said, choose the virtual disk format, choose the location where I want it to go, click the next button, and then finally finish, and this entire process will move that virtual machine's VMDK file from one location to the other and then change the disk format on my behalf. This is excellent. The one thing I will tell you, however, is that an svmotion is a relatively long process, actually going through completing the svmotion. While it does so with the virtual machine staying powered on, well, moving the brains of a virtual machine, the processing of a virtual machine,